Like I said, good morning, everybody. Just a little house cleaning before we start. We're going to keep everybody muted for the duration of the presentation. Any questions that may come up, please drop them in the chat, and we'll get them in the Q&A at the end if we have time. Or if worst case scenario, we'll email every response, email response to every question that we do get in the chat. So feel free, drop it in the chat as Joe goes along talking. Any question we have, bounce across us. I may be able to insert it in the conversation, but if not, you're going to get a response back on it. Also, this presentation will be recorded. So if you email me, I'll send you the link to the recording. I give you my email at the end. So why don't we just start by jumping in and introducing ourselves. Well, like I said, hello, good morning. I want to thank everybody for being here and joining our discussion on everything you need to know about cybersecurity insurance. Let me introduce myself. I'm Wayne Roy, the CEO of TroyNet. We're a managed security solution provider. We've been around for over 20 years, if you can believe it, and work with small to mid-sized companies in the US. We look at technology from a perspective of goals and objectives, not tasks and products. In other words, what we care about is business productivity and your bottom line. That's why we wanted to kind of bring this session together to talk about cyber insurance and how lack of compliance can impact your business. I'm also joined here with Joe Randall. Joe is the Director of Agency Operations at DataStream Insurance and is fully licensed in all 50 states. He has 15 years of leadership experience as well as volleyball and is focused on staying at the forefront of new development in the evolving cyber insurance space. And Joe, I know you're going to talk about some crazy things going on with insurance, and I know a lot of people here are seeing changes and shifts in it. So I'm looking for us to really dive in. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. And thank you so much for putting this together. It's a pleasure to be on, and an area that is a constantly evolving space. And we just hope that today will be educational for people, and love that we've added some time for Q&A and also the ability for people to drop in questions. So what we're really looking to accomplish today is to give an overview of the landscape currently. And again, focus on education and answering any questions that people have. One of the first questions always comes up is what is cyber insurance and how is it different from other types of insurance? And we'll cover that. We'll also talk about the cost of a cyber attack incident and how that can really add up, and having a way to measure that and sort of weigh the pros and cons of cybersecurity with insurance and what could happen in a worst case scenario, or just in a medium case scenario, which are the most common things. And then we're going to talk about surrounding yourself with experts and the importance of that. I think obviously everyone here is already taking a great step in working with Wayne and TroyNet and bringing in that expert help. But we'll talk about specifically in regards to cyber insurance, in the case of an incident, having that right team of support to handle any situation that comes up. And ultimately, we want to give more confidence to people when they think about insurance as it relates to cyber and a potential incident down the road. So what we've seen happening, Wayne, with cyber insurance recently is, and gosh, I would say this is really over the past 18 months or so, it's really been a changing landscape. And as we get further down that timeline, even in the last few months, we've seen some rapid evolutions. We hear and see online from friends and colleagues that people are having a lot of challenges getting cyber insurance, and also people are getting quite a bit of sticker shock, and rightfully so, with increasing premiums. And a note on this, and one sort of general observation that we've seen, Wayne, in having our sort of eyes on the greater landscape here is, as I mentioned, over the past 18 months, there's been sort of a divergence in insurance companies. There are the more traditional, established insurance companies that, those logos that probably everyone on this meeting today would recognize instantly, and that have been in insurance for a long, long time. And they have multiple lines. They might have commercial general insurance products. They might have workers' compensation insurance products. They have business auto coverage and other types of liability. And with cyber insurance really becoming its own product, just recently over the past few years kind of breaking off from being a bundled product. And that's a key distinction for people to understand, is that cyber insurance is its own entity. It's not ideally bundled into a package anymore. Well, as that started to happen, these sort of more traditional companies, they said, well, gosh, you know what? We're really comfortable with our actuarial sciences around workers' compensation and around professional liability, but we just don't really understand the data on cyber insurance and cyber attacks. And when there is an incident in the cyber world, it can hit the full policy limit in a few days instead of a few years. So these companies that are very comfortable with their other lines of products, they're either making it very difficult to get cyber insurance, or they're increasing the cost of cyber insurance to the point that they sort of are okay with their customers saying they don't want that product from them because they don't really want much to do with it. And then we've got a whole another group of cyber specific insurance companies that are very data forward, and they are really trying to get ahead of the curve, and they are specializing in this product because they know that cyber insurance over the next 20 to 50 years will most likely be the largest type of insurance in the marketplace with the evolution of where things are going. So that's a little bit of background on why things are becoming challenging and expensive. So a lot of that can be just navigating the landscape to find the right insurance company. And then we're also seeing that advanced cyber defenses are becoming more essential, right? We've got to try to stay ahead of the criminals, and that's a challenge. But we are putting ourselves in a great position for cyber insurance if we have these defenses. It's heavily weighed by the insurance companies, the type of defenses that are in place when they look at pricing a policy or just the type of coverage that's being offered. When we look at the cyber insurance market, and this is what we were just touching about, and we had a chance to connect on a couple of days ago.
Yes.
The cost of the premiums is just, you see that hockey stick effect going up, right? We're seeing some companies double or triple the premium they have to pay this year, just over last year. And so when we look at this over a course of 10 years, you see that this hockey stick is starting to go a little bit more vertical, and that's never something you want to see when it's a cost graph, right? So we're seeing that there's a dramatic increase in the amount of premiums that insurance companies are looking for in the cyber insurance market. And the reason for that, or a primary driver of that, is that if we were to look at the amount of ransomware attacks, and I think that most people are aware, Wayne, of kind of the general concept of what ransomware is, but to step back for just a second about this, ransomware has a few different forms, but the worst form is if someone were to show up to their office one day and they just have bricked computers. The computers either have that dreaded blue screen or a black screen with a ransom message, right? And it's tough to say until a forensic expert gets into the system how a threat actor got into the network, but sometimes it was months ago or potentially even years ago where a threat actor will get into a system and they will incubate that system. And then when they feel there's a real vulnerability, they'll trigger a ransomware attack. A lot of times, if they're in a system, they're able to see there's an upcoming, actually, there's a lot of school systems, unfortunately, have been hit by this recently. So they'll know right before the school year to ask for a ransom, or they'll know with certain industries that there's a big event coming up or some essential activity that has to take place. And that's when they'll trigger this ransomware attack because they're hoping to get paid. And we've seen a huge increase in this from 2020 to 2021, and even data in this year, it's increasing even more. So they're becoming more and more prevalent. And these are the type of attacks. I know we have some data on this later, but like I said, they can hit the full policy limit in days. They can be extremely expensive, and in times, they're at times, unfortunately, these criminals view themselves as business people, and they are definitely criminals but they are very good at knowing how much ransom to ask for, knowing how they're going to get paid, and being able to really work this system. So the increase in these ransomware attacks, which are covered by a good cyber insurance policy, has led to a lot of policy claims being paid out, which has led to that graph we saw on the previous slide, where the premiums are going up dramatically because the companies are having to rework their algorithms around how they charge the premiums based on claims in the past. So quite frightening statistics, but it's important for us to look at the reality of the situation, and that's why we're all here, right? Is to learn about insurance, but also to focus on the cyber security that we're putting into place in individual businesses. This slide here is, gosh, the number always looks big to me, even though I've seen this over and over, Wayne, but the average cost of a data breach is almost $3 million. Now, I have seen quite a few that are not this big. I mean, we hear about these all the time. So this is not always going to happen, but then there's some that are right there a lot larger. And that's why this is coming in as an average. And when we look at a data breach, it might involve a ransomware element to it. It might involve business interruption. Business interruption we'll talk about a little bit later on. That's where normal business cannot take place. So there's a cost associated with that. If a company is down for a month or 6 weeks, or slow for 2 months and they can't fulfill normal business, that is a real cost out there. When we look at data breaches, there are a lot of regulatory concerns, particularly in certain industries. There can be not just fines that are taking place, but there could be efforts such as having to purchase a personal protection service for the next year for everyone whose data was accessed. That does happen at times. There might need to be a call center set up to notify people. There might need to be a press release. And then, of course, as we look at insurance as a product and go, hey, why would someone want insurance? And why would someone want cyber insurance as opposed to just their general? Well, all these elements that are involved in an attack are, of course, covered in a good policy, but it's not just the coverage that's important. It's having experts in each of these areas of forensics, negotiation, remediation, public relations, in being able to quickly put together a defensive front in the case of one of these attacks. So it's always a big number to me, but these are the real statistics. It's important for people to see them, I feel like, Wayne. Moving on from this.
Joe,
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Just a question for you. Am I correct in saying that the average coverage that a company should look at is 3 to 4 months of revenue for a breach?
Yeah, no, that's really an astute question. That is typically what we recommend. Yes, is in that 3 months figure is a good ballpark to use when we're looking at an amount of coverage, because it's not just there might be a ransom. It's not just we might need forensic investigators to go in. It's really that business interruption piece where business may be down for an extended period of time. So hopefully it's not going to be 3 months, but we look at that 3 to 4 month figure because there might also be, legal costs. There might be a ransom itself, and there might be a call center and like all these other things in addition to business being slow. So I think that's a really smart figure to look at.
Excellent.
In these other figures that just popped up on the slide, it's so interesting and quite sad, see when you're in this world hearing these stories every day, but you look at the large average cost figure, and you think, okay, this might just be a problem that just the Fortune 1000 companies are dealing with. But in reality, it's small businesses and medium businesses that are facing the majority of these attacks. So you see 68% of small businesses had a cyber attack last year. These come in several different forms, and we'll touch on those in a few slides. But 68% of small businesses experienced a cyber attack last year, and 61% of cyber attacks as a whole target small businesses. and as well as medium-sized business. So this is an issue that's certainly not just for that Fortune 1000 companies or very large corporations or cities and state entities. It's really an issue that is facing the small and medium business community. And as you see, the saddest part is, of course, there are people suffering financial losses, but the amount of bankruptcies and business closures because of this is quite startling, and also a great reason to explore cyber insurance and if it might be right for a company to help prevent against these, in addition to the cybersecurity steps that we're all taking. We're going to look at some of these items individually later on, but this is a great breakdown of what is covered in a cyber insurance policy. There's a few different types of general groupings, right? There's first-party coverage, and an easy way to think of first-party coverage is that's something that happens to my business, right? So that is directly affecting me. And then there's third-party coverage. So that's if a threat actor were to get into my business, but they're able to get someone else's information and they're able to attack someone else because they breached my system. So those third-party coverages are very important too. In business interruption, we talked about a little bit here as well. So we do see there's also these two columns, right? There's a standalone cyber insurance product, and that is what I think everyone who's looking at cyber insurance should really evaluate, because there is an option here on the right to have a packaged cyber insurance product. And that's meaning, okay, if you have a commercial general insurance policy, which everyone does at this point, there's a way to add on a rider for cyber coverage. But as it points out here, it really only covers a few items, and it can be very limited in those areas. But it can also cover other things not at all. So particularly the most common things that we see day in, day out, well, the data breaches and the ransomware, of course, those are the big ones, and those are happening all the time. But there are smaller incidents too, cyber crime related, whether it's wire transfer fraud, all those annoying fake emails that everyone gets and fake text messages, the phishing attempts. Those are all cyber crime related, and those are the most common thing that happens in our experience from what we hear about. And those are typically not covered at all in a packaged policy. So it's very wise to look at these standalone policies, make sure that coverage is comprehensive and lined up. And we'll have a chance to go through these in a few slides here. And please, if anyone has questions. Oh, perfect. I was just going to queue for any questions here.
Joe, I have a question for you. Am I correct to say that most people are confusing the fact that they have the bundle package with cyber in it? They assume they have full cybersecurity insurance when they don't, because they don't have the full features that come with standalone. Is that correct? That
is, yeah, that's spot on. That's absolutely correct. And confused for a good reason, right? Because they have a commercial policy and they see an option to add on cyber coverage. And so if you're not reading through the details of the policy, someone would think, yeah, I just added cyber on, but it's very limited when it's a rider to a commercial policy. And that's why it's so important we're taking time to look at this and that everyone really understands what they have. And please don't get me wrong, it's better than having nothing, but a standalone policy will cover comprehensively for all of these areas. And I think it makes me a little nervous because when people think they have cyber, but it really doesn't cover, gosh, hardly 20% of the threats out there, if that. So yes, spot on that there's a lot of confusion around this, and it's an industry, right? Cyber insurance has only been sort of emerging over the last few years, and it's somewhat not standardized as an insurance product now. It's starting to become a little more so, but people are rightfully confused, and that's why we take these opportunities to try to provide as much education as possible.
Got it. All right. Thanks, Joe. I want to talk a little bit about the reality of small business. We're talking about these cybersecurity insurance and why, but with everything going on, the numbers are showing that companies still working from the good enough and not me mentality when it comes to security for their business. And this is why cybersecurity is very important.
Mhm.
The stats show that 58%, we're back to statistics again, that 58% believe that they're unlikely to be attacked by cyber criminals. But let me ask you a question. Think about this. If you were going to rob a bank, would you target Fort Knox or a small local bank that has no security guard protecting it? Hackers know that, and they attack small business because they know they're easier than attacking large corporations. The issue is large corporations make the news, but a small company doesn't. They're the ones being targeted. You're more likely to get targeted than a very large organization. The stats also show that 43% do not have a cybersecurity plan, and 50% do not provide employee security training. So let me just explain, comment on these two items. First, IT support is not a cybersecurity plan. A plan incorporates IT support, but saying you have IT support does not immediately mean you have a plan in place. Second, cybersecurity training is not a conversation in one of the annual company meetings. You should be following a secure practice and reinforcing it all through the year through different methods for your organization. Let me talk about what controls you must have in place and what most cyber insurance applications you fill out are requesting. I know everybody's getting in and just filling them out, but do you truly have those things in place that you're saying yes to? But if you say yes to it and a claim happens and they check you and you don't really have what you say you have, your claim will be denied. And Joe, comment on that a little later on that if I'm spot on with that comment I just made. Let's talk about the first thing, cybersecurity training. It is one of the most important things you have. It's not for audit process, but for the security and reputation of your company. Remember, the biggest threats are ransomware attacks, and those attacks are targeting your employees. Employees must be continuously trained on how to protect your business, okay? Multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is one of the top questions asked on most applications. What multi-factor authentication does is provide more than one form of identification for you to access your company data. I'll give you an example. It's like when you need to open a bank account or you're doing a transaction with the government. Since you have potential access to sensitive information, they require more than one piece of identification. They may require 3 or 4 pieces of information for you to prove who you are. That's the same thing that MFA does. Even if your username and password are compromised, a hacker will still need all the other additional information for them to access your data. That's what MFA does for you. Risk assessments and regular backups. Risk assessments is assessment that identifies workplace hazards and gives you steps on reducing or eliminating those risks. In the past, this has been asked to be done annually for a lot of organizations, but this is being moved up where they're requesting it quarterly, and some components they expect you to have going on continuously when it comes to assessments. Backup. Now, this is a no-brainer. If you get a ransomware attack, your data is lost, your system's compromised, what are you going to do if you don't have a backups? Every business knows that, but let me talk about 2 things you need to consider for backup for your business. The first thing is the time it'll take to recover your data and systems. How long can you afford to wait to get your data and systems back up? Is it an hour, a day, a week? How much money can you afford to lose while waiting to go back to work again? These are questions you need to ask and then base your backup solution delivering your requirements. Because I talk to most organizations, they say they have backup, but they need to think about what's really important about the backup. The second item is retention. How far back can you go in your backup if your system was compromised or data was last lost in 30 days ago? Or you're just realizing it now, can you actually go back to that data prior to the 30 days and recover? Or can you only get back a day or a week of your data? A comment on what you mentioned, Joe, about the breaches. They say it takes a company 190 days on average to identify they had a breach. So without proper backup, what does that tell you? An insurance covers the cost of recovering, but you can't recover something you don't have. Email security and protection. I'm not going to go heavy into email security. I have another slide that I'm going to comment on, but remember, emails are the gateway to cyber threats. Let's talk about endpoint protection, which is EDR. A lot of people think that's antivirus. It's not. EDR has features that address a wider range of security threats. The difference is almost like looking at a horse-drawn carriage compared to a sports car that we have today. There's no comparisons, two different technologies. So whoever you work with, if they're not using EDR and you're talking antivirus, your threat level is going to be a lot higher. PAM and logging. Privileged access management is what PAM means. This is not the same as having just logging into computer with a username and password. What privileged access management does is actually addresses who you are, what you're accessing, when you're accessing it, and where you're accessing it from. It's an advanced level of monitoring how your employees are interacting with your company and your company data. Logging and monitoring, you may hear the word SIEM or MDR. This allows you to have a real-time monitoring analysis of events, as well as tracking a log of security data for compliance and auditing purposes. Okay, the most important takeaway for all of this, I don't want you to get caught up in the jargon, but remember, security is not about each of these items, it's about putting all of them together to solve a problem. Protecting against cyber threats is like putting a puzzle together. You have to have all the pieces to complete the puzzle. An IT support company may have knowledge of one or two of these controls, but a security-focused company will understand all the pieces and know how they fit together. I hear too many conversations where I have IT support, but the question is, do they have the knowledge of true security, which you really need when you deal with cyber or any other compliance requirements? Now, I mentioned about email, okay? If everybody can jot this web address down, what you're gonna do is go to this site. It will actually give you a score on the security for your email. You go in, you put your email address in, and you submit it. It's gonna send you an email, you're gonna reply back to it, okay? The reason for this is it's actually gonna score you on how your ability when you're going out, your outgoing email, and it's going to score you on your vulnerability for incoming email. If you get a score less than 800, reach out to me because I think you have some work to do. Okay, that's actually our company score up there, 850. That is phenomenal for an organization. I don't expect you to get that, but I expect you to get close to that. Joe, let me hand it back to you so you can touch more on the coverage around insurance.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'm so happy you brought this service up. I'm going to try that later today too. And it is,
Joe, you better rank 900 on that.
Yeah, it's very in line with what we see too. I mean, everyone is bombarded by these phishing emails, right? And it's easy to sort of think, oh, this is just common, but that's the most common way threat actors get into a system and is the root cause for an enormous amount of incidents. So I think that's such a smart thing to be looking at. And perfect, unfortunate segue here to the next topic, which is what we're looking for in a comprehensive cyber insurance product is protection against data breaches, of course. So that's what we've been focusing on a little bit here, but that's someone gets into a system and they can then have access to just about any data in there if they're able to navigate through. Depending on the industry or the vertical that a business is in, it's going to have varying implications. But it's vital to have a team to support you. You see, there's like these, what is covered on the left and to consider on the right. In a good standalone cyber insurance policy, there will be a team, a breach coach law firm at your disposal to help you. There'll be a 24/7/365 hotline to initiate any claims. But when we start looking at these check marks on the left, so we talk data breach, it's very confusing depending on what industry someone is in, depending on what information they have, to even think about the implications of what could happen. So in the case of an incident, the first call goes to this hotline. There's a breach coach law firm that immediately takes control, and attorney-client privilege is attained, and there's a forensic expert that will go in and see what data was compromised and what implications this could have. And there's a team of lawyers there to be able to help remediate this incident. There's cyber attacks on your data held by vendors and other third parties. So this is a very real thing that is a risk, and is also covered. General cyber attacks, of course, these things we've been talking about: ransomware, cybercrime, all the components, and cyber attacks that occur anywhere in the world. It's an interesting way the cyber insurance market works, because it's a little bit different than crime in a physical address. It's the network that is protected. So in a good cyber insurance policy, it's your network, regardless of where an employee may be traveling, right? They may be traveling and logging on remotely. Regardless of where they are, the network is protected. But then also, as another side note to this, these cyber attacks, they come from all over the world also. So the network is protected regardless of where employees are, but these cyber attacks, they initiate from all over the world. And there are some sophisticated organizations that know they're operating from non-extradition countries. So that means that if they commit a crime in the United States, they're not going to be held accountable in the same way because of the country they're in. So it's important to know that these threat actors are out there. They're all over the world, and they can access data anywhere now. So that's another reason it's so important to have this, or at least consider a cyber insurance product, because there may not, depending on where these criminals physically are, there may not be the same laws and regulations that would apply to someone who gets caught in the act if they were residing in the United States. So important to think comprehensively, of course, about your cybersecurity, but also protecting yourself in the best way possible. So these are going into a little bit more specific detail about first-party and third-party coverage. Again, we mentioned that first-party coverage, an easy way to think of that is kind of, this is what happens to my business, right? So there could be fraud and extortion. Ransomware, in a technical term, ransomware is called cyber extortion in policy. So if you're ever looking at a policy and you see cyber extortion, that means ransomware. So fraud and extortion happen. If there is a data breach, we touched on, there could be public relations and crisis management necessary, call centers notifying people of their data exposure, forensic investigation involving multiple experts, right? So these are things that are covered. Of course, income lost as a result of a disruption in business, that's called business interruption coverage. And there's also another one called dependent or contingent business interruption, which we'll touch on in the next slide. And it's important to think through all these elements and just to know that, and again, my overarching theme is that insurance is not there just to be a product and to be a number. That is important, right, is to have compensation, but it's really about the team that's available, experts, because it's not just monetary compensation. When there is an incident, a business wants to get back up and running as soon as possible. And they want their customers, even in an unfortunate situation, to get the best service possible, right? So we're looking at to have the best team available and to have experts in every sort of specific area here that an incident may approach. Third-party coverages. So this is, again, not necessarily what happens to my business, but a threat actor gets into my business. Now, what could happen to other people? Because of what these are customers, right? Of course, whose interests were violated. There could be regulatory issues. There's oftentimes, in particular in certain industries, there's a lot of regulatory issues. So claims and settlements. And I do see some questions popping up. That's great. I guess, Wayne, I would say if you think there's any questions, I can't really see them all, but we can go through at the end, right, in Q&A,
Yeah,
but if there is anything
we're
you'd
gonna
like
wait
me to
we're
address
gonna
on
wait
the
until
spot.
the end, and then we can address the questions that's there. But I have a
Okay.
question for you on
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
to clarify on the third party coverage. And I assume you're going through this because not all policies may have these components, but these are things everybody have to be aware of. But third party component is, hey, you got breached, and because of that breach, that affected me, and which
Mhm.
happens in most cases. There's possibility that if you don't have the right policy, you are not covered by me coming after you saying, hey, Joe, your company did this and it affected me. Now I want to sue you.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right, spot on both counts. That is what this coverage is intended for, and it's definitely not included in a lot of policies, particularly when it's a like an add-on or a rider to a commercial policy. Those riders, they might compensate for actually like paying a ransom out, but not necessarily for these things. And these can be those expenses that really drive the cost of an incident up and up and up and up. It's these third-party coverages. So yeah, you're spot on there.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And you see, depending on
I think
different
you
industries, we could be
sorry.
dealing with trademark and copyright. Yeah, please go ahead.
I apologize. No, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's just a variety of third-party coverages, and again, as Wayne pointed out, a good standalone policy will have coverage for all these areas. It's just important for us to make sure we're reading through carefully and that we are understanding what is covered, and especially if there's like a lot of things, if there's a situation that looks a little too good to be true and there's just quickly adding on cyber coverage to another type of insurance product, we may want to just take a deeper read into what is actually covered in those policies. So this is a little general information on the cost of cyber insurance. Again, we're talking about these standalone cyber insurance products. It's a little bit tough to just start pinning numbers on the cost of cyber insurance because it does depend on the industry someone's in, right? So the general vertical that's separated out by those NAICS codes, NAICS codes that everyone's probably somewhat familiar with. So we've got the vertical someone's in, we've got their type of exposure based on that vertical, and then that is combined with this one on the right, which is vital, right, is the cybersecurity controls. So
Joe, you're actually answering one of the questions because one of the
great.
questions,
Okay.
what's the cost for insurance is based on industry. And if I'm correct, what you're saying is there are specific codes for each industry, and based on that industry is how that affects your policy as well, correct?
That is correct. It's really there's a few main driving factors. The first is industry, and there's a code for each industry, so that will kind of start the sort of separation there. And then it's yearly revenue is the other big driver of what the premium is going to be. And the reason they look at the yearly revenue so much is because of that business interruption coverage we've been touching on throughout, that they look at, okay, what industry is someone in and what's their yearly revenue, because they want to know, hey, if this business is down or slow for 2 months, what is that going to equate to in claims? And they also know that if there is a ransomware event, the criminals are very good once they're in a system. They can look at someone's balance sheet or their P&L, and they can kind of say, okay, this is the amount of ransom we're going to ask for because they're this size of company. So yeah, it's first is industry, then revenue size, and then there also is something on here that it does reference claims history, and that is something they will look at as well. If there has been an incident in the past 3 years, it's certainly not impossible to get insurance, but that will be factored in to sort of like the overall cost. And then of course the cyber security controls that are in place are a big driver of not just the cost of a premium of a policy, but being able to access the right policy. And this is something that I feel like there's a little bit of confusion about, rightfully so, right? Is that there are a lot of different insurance carriers that offer cyber insurance, and they don't all cover necessarily the same things. but they also don't necessarily handle claims in the same way. And that's something we always look to educate people on, is that the way claims are handled in terms of the way compensation is paid out can be different. And one common way is called by reimbursement. So that means that if there is an incident, someone pays up front, and then they're reimbursed for whatever costs they have. There's another type that does what's called pay on behalf. So that means the bills are directly paid by the insurance company. It's sort of like using your company credit card directly and not really having to worry about where the bills are going, or you use your personal credit card and like, okay, I know I'm going to get reimbursed for this 30 days later, but there's going to be some paperwork and it might take a minute. So that's where, if you have the right cybersecurity controls, not only will the premiums be lower that you have access to, but you can pick and choose the policy that handles claims in the way that's most advantageous for you, and you have access to all the different carriers out there. Whereas if someone doesn't have certain cybersecurity controls, they can probably still get cyber insurance. It just might be a little more expensive, and it might not handle claims in that pay on behalf of, or like the most advantageous way. And to me, that's very important, because just like we want the best team of experts available to us, if there is an incident, we want the claims handled in the way that's most advantageous and just the easiest. No one wants to be trying to figure out how to buy a Bitcoin to send to a criminal to unlock their system, and then or dealing with that reimbursement. It can be a little tricky. Now, either way, reimbursement or pay on behalf, there will be a team of experts via the breach coaches to help navigate. But I just think it's important to dig into these details a little bit. Okay. The deductibles down here too, this is something that's interesting, is you see the term retention. Retention in the commercial insurance world means deductible, like as deductible would be to a healthcare insurance. So it's the amount that you are responsible for before the insurance kicks in. So there's a couple different types of retention. You can see on the left in the orange box, there's deductible, means if a claim is $100,000 and the retention's $10,000, a business would still be paying that first $10,000, and then the insurance would pay the remaining $90,000. And then in the self-retention, you see it's similar, but there's a little bit more coverage available there.
So Joe, so from here, I'm hearing the two biggest takeaway I'm getting right now is A, knowing your cyber insurance policy you have, and understanding whether that's saying, hey, you pay out of pocket, then get reimbursed, which nobody wants that. So I think everybody's going to go back and check their policies now, because nobody would know to check that. Everybody assumes it pays, and then the policy will just pay, you never come out of pocket. So that's a big takeaway for me, as well as understanding the deductibles, because, hey, if I look at the deductible retention, you get actually more money payout if you do it the right way. The self-retention gives you 100K compared to 90K on your pay. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And these are things that you really, no one would really think to check for, because they're a little bit buried in the policy of the 90-page document. And
so when you phenomenal takeaway that I have right now. So Joe, so tell me how, I'm going to set you up for the next slide. How can I reduce my premium?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There are a variety of ways to do this, right? And most importantly, well, let me just pop these open. Okay, so most importantly, so as I was saying before, it's a little bit interesting that we have to picture that we're not just talking to one insurance company, right, that is deciding how much your premium is. It's like, okay, we have 30 to choose from. So if we have the best cybersecurity controls in place, EDR that Wayne was talking about, 24/7 security monitoring, we have, we're doing penetration tests, we're doing all these things, that is putting us in the position to where we can interact with the best insurance carriers in this space that are going to have the lowest premiums to start with. And then even once we interact with them, we have the cyber controls in place that will get a lower premium from them as well. So it's almost like a double interaction here, where first we can filter to the best, or our top choices. They're going to have the better premiums, but then we have the right things they're looking for, and we can get our premium to be the best possible. So it's and this one here, the implement a strong password policy. Gosh, I think everyone struggles with this. You know, myself included at times, because you've got a million passwords and keeping track of them all. But just like the email monitoring that Wayne was talking about, it's so important, and it does take a little extra time. But you know, the password protection, email, being thoughtful about email, is so important and surprisingly effective with limiting a lot of exposure. And then yes, being very thoughtful about the records that are stored, and just cybersecurity best practices. So I think everyone on here has already taken the right steps, obviously, to connect with an expert like Wayne. I mean, couldn't recommend that more. And these things, implementing a comprehensive approach is going to, from an insurance perspective, give you the best options, but also have the lowest premium, hopefully a lower retention too, like we were just looking at. So that needs to be factored in, is what is that retention, as well as a low premium, because sometimes it's a sliding scale of, oh, you have a low premium, but the retention is $25,000 per incident. So when we have advantageous controls, we can look for a lower premium and a lower retention, which puts someone in a much better place. Because if you look at like a yearly cost of a potential incident, it's the premium, but also that retention to be factored in. So that's I'll get off my soapbox for a minute here, and I can toss it back to you, Wayne.
All right. Well, we can touch base. I just recap on some of the challenges of SMB. We all know premiums going higher. The expectation for SMB is increasing. There's lack of knowledge of the right controls, and setting up a SOC, which is like a security operations center, is unreasonable and expensive for most small business. Well, actually, for all small business. And coverage requirements becoming harder. So how can we help? I'll keep it as simple as possible. Remember, in court, what doesn't get documented never happened. You need to be able to provide proof that you've done due diligence to protect your company, employee, vendor, and client information. That's what most, between getting the cyber insurance applications, as well as if something happens, that's what they're looking for, okay? They want to know, can you provide a list of all the assets that access company data, logs of any activity, a report of remediations? If there's an attack, can you produce a root cause analysis of who, what, where, and why? Remember, documentation beats conversation if you have a claim or you have to go into litigation. Okay? IT support and IT security is two different things, and I'm going to harp on this. I give you an example. I don't go to my general practice physician for heart surgery. He can give me general advice, but I'm not expecting him to do the work. As you can see, most of what insurance providers, we talked about things reducing your policies, it says controls. They're looking to make sure that you're doing the right things and be able to document and show proof of what's happening. We have seen that there's a lack of understanding of what's needed, and we've looked at the problem, and we've built out tool sets that'll give your company the ability to follow the best security practice, work with our company. As you see, all these things, we talked about that puzzle. We've put all the pieces for that puzzle. So, hey, if you ever have to go out and renew your policies, you're in the best light possible. If there's a claim or if there's a lawsuit, you can go back now and physically have the proof that, hey, I've done due diligence. And it's not saying, hey, I got an IT company in their antivirus, because that's not going to fly in a court of law, because that's not due diligence and it's not well documented. We're able to help you with that. We have the tools in place. So quick highlight, recap. Cyber attacks are increasing. Ransom payments are increasing. Companies need to make sure they have the right coverage and policies so they won't pay out of pocket when something happens. The most important thing, do you have the right policies? Do you even know what I'll bet that 9 out of 10 people do not know what's on their cybersecurity policies. What are they actually covered for? You need to know that, or you need to have somebody a good advisor like Joe that can advise you what's in your policy and are you completely covered. Insurance carriers are demanding more to qualify for cyber insurance. They're looking at all the controls. And just because you get a policy doesn't mean you will on a claim. A lot of people assume, hey, they gave me the policy, that means everything is good. No, they're saying, hey, you just filled out this form. Now there's a claim. They're going to say, okay, prove what you said in this form is true. And if you cannot do that, you will not make a claim. Bottom line is, company needs to step up and meet the requirements, or they'll lose coverage or lose a claim. Joe, can you chime in on that? Am I correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And it's one reason that we encourage everyone to be very thoughtful in the application process. And it's also a reason to do this closely with your IT consultant and to be able to get some advice there. And the terminology in the insurance industry is to the best of your knowledge. So we're just making sure that everything is accurate. We highly recommend an auditing process here, where after someone secures a cyber insurance policy, they take the application they filled out and they document proof. We have a free, easy way to do this, but anyone can do it on their own as well, just to show proof of the way they answered each question to the best of their knowledge and why. And that's really what an insurance company is looking for. It's in the application process is where we want to be thoughtful here, because it will be verified if there is a claim that the protections that were in place or were said to be in place were actually in place. So
Yep.
yes, you're spot on there.
You're spot on with that. And the application is what people feel. Our assessments is what's reality. And that's why we normally come in and do these assessments to see what's going on. But Joe, do you have time for some questions? I'm going to go just do 1 or 2 questions if you have the time for it, Joe.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, let me look at what's here. Is it necessary to add a cyber insurance requirement in a business associate agreement for all vendors that I do business with? I have a comment on that, Joe. If you have a comment on that, let me know.
Will you go ahead and then I'd be happy to comment afterwards?
I would actually say yes, because your business associate agreement, and I assume you talk about HIPAA, because we do the HIPAA compliancy audits for, let me rephrase, assessments. It's not audit, assessments for healthcare practices. And I assume you talk about the business associate agreements associated with that. If you have a business associate agreement with somebody else, but they have not done due diligence on their side to make sure they're compliant, they have a breach and that a breach affects you, that also falls on you. Am I correct with that, Joe?
I mean, I think that it's very wise to do, and it's something that we talk about internally a little bit. We feel like, and again, I can't predict this, but I feel like it's wise to think through this. And we see very commonly a lot of requirements. One of the biggest reasons people reach out to us is because there is a requirement in a vendor agreement just like this. So I think it's very wise, and there are certain industries that are already requiring it across the board. And what I was browsing, we're talking about internally, and we don't have any way to know for sure, but over the next couple of years, in a lot of industries, it will be a requirement across the board, most likely.
I'm going to talk from a business owner perspective and understanding, hey, liability. If something happens, the lawyer is going to look for the person with the deepest pocket. If your business associate does not have insurance or the capital to pay out for that lawsuit, they're going to look for the next person in line. And if you're available and you have money from the insurance company that'll pay for stuff, they're going to now come for you. So I would say, hey, get it across the board. That's my personal opinion. I'm not a lawyer, but that's what I would suggest if somebody asked me that question. We touched bases. The one that was the cost of insurance is based on industry. We kind of touched base on that. Is there any, Joe, is there any feedback? If there is an instance, what's the normal turnaround time for a insurance policy to pay out on it? What is the process that's involved with that?
Yeah.
Hey, I call you up. I've had an incident. I'm in a panic mode.
Mhm.
Okay. Am I waiting 2 months? Am I digging what happens in that thing? How am I with a good policy? We can talk
Right.
about it, we can talk good, because I know that you have some horror stories, but what
Yep.
should my expectations be if now something happens and I now have to go in my pocket and pay out something?
Mhm. Well, and this is kind of going back to some of the things we were talking about on previous slides. As a general comment, I would say even for me, it's difficult to say because every insurance carrier can be different in this standpoint. But that's why it's so important that we take very thoughtful steps to protect ourselves. So when choosing a policy, we want to make sure that it has that 24/7 hotline that is available that goes directly to a breach coach. So first, and one thing that we are mindful of with all of our partners and customers, we recommend everyone after they choose a cyber insurance policy to build an incident response plan. In this incident response plan will be the 24/7 hotline that goes directly to the breach coach. And then the question is kind of getting at really why it's so important to me that I'm doing everything I can to find a pay on behalf of claims handling policy. So if we can be mindful that we have the 24/7 hotline and that the policy, as much as we can find, handles claims via pay on behalf, that alleviates a lot of that concern because the bills are flowing directly to the insurance company rather than having to pay for things and then look for reimbursements, because it's difficult for me to say how long that might take on the spot. But if possible, let's not deal with it at all. Let's put ourselves in the best position that we can. I would just say in terms of response time, again, incidents vary based on what happened in this incident, but these are very time sensitive things. And so when this incident response breach coach is engaged, things get in motion quickly in terms of response time, because a lot of in a lot of instances, particularly with ransomware, cyber extortion, we might be dealing with a deadline to meet, and we want to have forensic analysis before that and have negotiation before that deadline comes up. So the wheels will get in motion quickly. The part that's a little bit more difficult is, okay, if there's out-of-pocket costs, when will those get reimbursed? Hard for me to give a hard deadline on that, but that's why I really recommend checking for the hotline. Let's, if at all possible, choose a pay on behalf of policy.
Joe, we have only like a minute left. So if I'm correct with this, if they have a good policy, they have a better chance of having quicker results and better coverage. Am I correct?
Yes.
So what's really critical, what's really important is for companies to have a partner or the right company. I'm not trying to pitch myself, I'm just being honest about it. Having a company that understands security controls, so you can have the best view of your company. Your company can be seen in the best light when you're going out to market to an insurance provider, because insurance provider are going to say, hey, what have you been doing? And if you can clearly articulate to them, hey, these are the things and these are our policies and procedures, this is how well we're running our organization and have our security practices in place, then now you can market to more insurance carriers and have the ability to say yes and no to policy that may not fit what you need. Am I correct with that?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Those are necessary steps.
Okay, then with that, guys, I'm wrapping up. We hit 2 o'clock on the dot. Actually, I'm over by 1 minute. I thank everybody for coming. I see in the chat there's tons of questions there. If anybody wants to reach out to me, shoot me an email, and I'll give you the recording, and I'll reach out to the people. If I can find the emails, please make sure you include your emails when you did register up. I'll respond back to the other questions that we have here in the chat. Joe, thank you for being on board with us. I appreciate you jumping on the webinar with us, and I thank everybody for coming today. Right?
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone.